The sun was setting over the crowded streets of Manila, painting the sky orange as the laughter of strangers echoed faintly between jeepneys and street vendors. In the middle of that chaos stood Rico de la Cruz, a skinny young man with a cracked microphone, a dented speaker, and the biggest smile in the world. He performed every evening at the corner of a small market, turning ordinary traffic jams into comedy shows. Children stopped to watch him, and adults threw coins into a rusted can beside him. "Life's tough, but at least laughter is free," he'd say, and somehow, everyone around him forgot their problems for a moment. Rico wasn't just telling jokes, he was surviving through them. He lived with his mother in a one-room wooden house, barely standing after years of storms. His mother, Rosa, was bedridden and weak, yet she always managed to smile when Rico came home. He'd sit beside her and replay his day, imitating the expressions of rude customers or confused policemen, and she would laugh until tears filled her eyes. "Son, laughter is your gift," she whispered one night, her frail hand resting on his. "Promise me you'll share it with the world." That promise became his dream, even though the world had never been kind to him. One morning, Rico saw a poster for AGT Pilipinas, the local version of America's Got Talent. His heart pounded as he read it: open auditions. Any talent. Any dream. It felt like destiny, but the thought of performing on a real stage terrified him. He didn't have fancy clothes or a new microphone. He didn't even have bus fare to get to the audition. Still, he couldn't ignore the fire burning in his chest. That night, he told his mother, "Ma, I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to audition." She smiled weakly and said, "Then make them laugh so hard they'll never forget your name." Rico slept under the sound of rain that night, dreaming not of riches but of applause. Days later, the audition hall buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of performers were waiting, holding guitars, costumes, and instruments. Rico stood in a corner wearing his only shirt, nervously clutching his broken microphone. The other contestants whispered when they saw him. "He looks like a janitor, not a performer," one laughed. Rico lowered his head, but then he remembered his mother's voice: "Laughter is your gift." When his name was finally called, he walked toward the stage with trembling hands but a brave heart. The judges sat in front of him: Simon Cowell, with his sharp eyes and unreadable face, beside two local celebrities smiling politely. Rico introduced himself softly: "Good evening, judges. My name is Rico de la Cruz, and I'm a street comedian." Simon raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. The audience murmured, expecting failure. Then Rico began his act, making fun of his poverty with bold honesty. "When you're poor in Manila," he said, "you don't need Netflix, just wait for the neighbors to fight." The crowd chuckled. He continued, building confidence with every punchline: "My mic is so old, it coughs before I do." Laughter erupted across the hall. Even Simon tried to stay serious, but his face broke into a grin. Rico's timing was perfect. Every joke came from truth, about skipping meals, about his mother, about turning sadness into smiles. People were laughing not at him, but with him. Halfway through, Simon suddenly burst into uncontrollable laughter, holding his stomach. The cameras caught the moment perfectly. The usually serious judge couldn't stop laughing. The entire hall rose to their feet, clapping and cheering for the poor comedian who had just stolen their hearts. When Rico finished, tears filled his eyes. He bowed deeply, overwhelmed. Simon leaned toward the mic and said, "Rico, I've seen thousands of comedians. But you, my friend, made me forget everything and just laugh. You might be poor, but you're richer in talent than half the world." The audience erupted again as the judges each gave him a yes. Rico walked off stage shaking, whispering to himself, "Ma, I did it." Backstage, he sat quietly, listening to the cheers still echoing behind him. He didn't have a trophy or money yet, but he had something better: hope. That night, as he returned home under the flickering streetlights, he held his mother's hand and told her every detail. She smiled weakly and said, "You made them laugh, didn't you?" He nodded, and for the first time in years, both of them laughed together, not out of pain, but out of pure joy and pride. It was only the beginning of Rico's journey, but in his heart, he knew he had already won. Rico woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing non-stop. His audition video had gone viral overnight, spreading across the internet like wildfire. Strangers from all over the Philippines and even abroad were commenting things like, "The poor comedian who made Simon Cowell laugh." And, Rico de la Cruz is the pride of Manila. News stations wanted interviews, fans were sending messages, and his small neighborhood treated him like a celebrity. But Rico wasn't used to fame. He still lived in the same small wooden home, still ate simple meals with his mother, and still worried about her medicine more than anything else. He tried to stay humble, but the pressure was building. The AGT Pilipinas semifinal was approaching, and people expected him to be even funnier. "You've got to be perfect this time," a producer told him. "Millions will be watching." Those words haunted him. Every time he practiced, his jokes felt forced. He was no longer laughing naturally. He was afraid of disappointing everyone: Simon, the judges, the audience, and his mother. One night, he sat by her bedside, confessing, "Ma, what if I'm not good enough anymore?" She smiled softly and said, "Son, the world laughed because you were honest, not perfect. Don't lose the boy who used to make jokes under the streetlight." The next morning, Rico received a surprise call. The assistant said, "Rico, Simon Cowell wants to speak with you." His heart almost stopped. When Simon's calm voice came through the phone, Rico was speechless. Simon said, "Listen, Rico. Don't perform for the judges. Don't even perform for the audience. Perform for the kid who once made people laugh just to forget hunger. That's who we all fell in love with." Rico didn't know what to say except, "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." After the call, he stood quietly in front of a mirror, staring at his reflection. "You're still that street kid," he whispered to himself. "Make them laugh your way." When the night of the semifinals arrived, the studio was electric. Bright lights flashed, cameras rolled, and the crowd chanted his name before he even stepped out. Rico took a deep breath and walked onto the stage with confidence he didn't know he still had. The moment the music faded, silence filled the room. Then he started talking about growing up in the slums, how his mom would use a broken umbrella to cover the holes in their roof, and how he'd tell jokes to distract her from the rain leaking in. The audience started laughing, but not just at the jokes, they were laughing through their tears. Rico's storytelling had heart, humor, and truth. At one point, he looked at Simon and said, "Sir Simon, you look like the kind of man who'd make a great landlord, scary but fair." The audience exploded with laughter, and Simon threw his head back, laughing uncontrollably. He tried to regain his composure, but Rico followed with another line, "I practiced your serious face in the mirror last night. Now my mirror's afraid of me." That did it. Simon couldn't stop laughing. Even the other judges were wiping tears from their eyes. When Rico finished, the entire studio stood up to clap. It was thunderous applause. The crowd chanted his name louder and louder. Simon stood, smiling proudly, then reached forward and slammed the golden buzzer. Gold confetti rained from the ceiling as Rico fell to his knees in shock. He looked up at the sparkling lights, his heart bursting with emotion. Tears streamed down his face as he shouted, "This is for my mama." The crowd cheered even louder. Simon walked up to him, shook his hand, and said, "You have a rare gift, Rico. You make people forget their pain with laughter. That's real talent." Backstage, Rico hugged the show's staff, his fellow contestants, and even the janitors who congratulated him. Reporters surrounded him, asking how it felt to get the golden buzzer. He just smiled and said, "It feels like the world finally laughed with me, not at me." That night, he rushed home to show his mother the recording. She watched it on a small old TV, crying softly. "You did it, my son," she whispered. Rico hugged her gently and said, "No, Ma. We did it." For the first time in their lives, their tiny house felt brighter than any stage. The night of the grand finale arrived, and the air inside the AGT Pilipinas studio was filled with electricity. Banners waved, lights flashed, and thousands of fans shouted Rico's name as he walked toward the stage. It had been months since his first audition, but his heart still pounded the same way it did back then. His mother couldn't be there in person. She was in a hospital bed, connected to wires and machines, watching her son on an old television the nurses had wheeled into her room. "Make them laugh again, my boy," she whispered, her voice weak but full of love. Rico closed his eyes backstage and imagined her face. That memory was his power. When his turn came, the audience fell silent. Rico walked to the microphone, looked around the massive stage, and smiled nervously. "Good evening, everyone. I'm still Rico, the poor street comedian, except now, people charge me for selfies. The audience laughed instantly. His voice carried warmth and sincerity that no fame could erase. He talked about his journey from street corners to this shining stage, turning every hardship into humor. "When I was broke, I thought AGT meant ain't got 10 pesos, he said, making the crowd roar with laughter. Even Simon Cowell chuckled, shaking his head. Then, Rico's tone softened. He began to tell the story of his mother, how she was the first to laugh at his jokes, even when there was nothing to eat. "My mother told me laughter was medicine," he said, his voice trembling. "Maybe that's why I became a doctor for sad people." The audience grew quiet, moved by his honesty. Then he turned the moment around with a punchline, "But unlike real doctors, my treatment doesn't cost a single peso." The hall erupted again. His performance was a perfect balance of humor and heart, something that touched everyone watching. As the crowd stood up, chanting his name, Simon leaned into his microphone and said, "Rico, you remind me why shows like this exist. You're not just funny, you're real. And you've made this whole country proud." The other judges agreed, praising his authenticity and courage. When it came time for the final results, Rico stood among the finalists, holding his breath. The lights dimmed, the music built, and the host finally announced the winner. It wasn't Rico. For a second, silence filled the room. Then, instead of disappointment, the audience started chanting, "Rico! Rico! Rico!" Simon stood and applauded. Rico smiled and clapped for the winner, then spoke into the mic. "Winning is great, but making people laugh from the heart, that's the real prize." The crowd roared, and even the winner hugged him on stage. Later that night, Rico returned to the hospital. His mother had tears in her eyes, but she was smiling proudly. "You may not have the trophy," she said softly, "but you already won my heart and everyone else's." Rico held her hand tightly and replied, "Ma, the world laughed with me because of you." They both laughed gently, and for that brief moment, everything felt perfect. Months passed, and Rico's life changed in ways he never imagined. He was invited to perform on television, travel across provinces, and even headline charity events. Yet he never forgot where he came from. With the money he earned, he opened a small comedy school in Manila called Laughs of Hope. It was a place where poor kids could learn how to perform, tell stories, and dream big just like he once did. He taught them not just to be funny, but to be fearless. "Don't be ashamed of your struggles," he would say. "They're what make your laughter real." One day, during a charity event, Rico was told there was a special guest waiting to meet him. When he turned around, Simon Cowell himself was walking toward him, smiling warmly. Simon had flown to the Philippines to surprise him. "You changed my life too, Rico," Simon said. "You reminded me what real talent is." He handed Rico a plaque that read the Heart of Laughter Award and announced that an international comedy stage would be built in Rico's name. The crowd cheered as Rico wiped away tears. "Thank you, Sir Simon," he said. "You taught me that laughter can travel farther than pain." That evening, Rico performed once more, not for fame, not for money, but for the children from the streets who sat cross-legged in front of his stage. He told them stories about hope, courage, and the power of laughter. The children laughed freely, their eyes bright. As the night grew darker, Rico looked up at the stars and whispered, "Ma, I did it. I made them laugh again." And somewhere in the heavens, it felt like she was laughing too.